Evan stood in the kitchen, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air, when the message popped up on his phone. He glanced down, expecting maybe a funny meme from his cousin or a work update. Instead, it was from his younger brother, Nathan. "Hey, just a heads up, Kayla's welcome home party is this weekend. Guest list's locked. Space is tight, so we had to trim it down. Hope you understand." Evan's fingers froze around his glass. A cold jolt shot through his chest. Trim it down? Hope you understand? His sister Kayla was coming home after 2 years abroad. The same Kayla he had stayed up talking to on video calls when she felt alone in a foreign country. The same Kayla he'd helped with her paperwork, surprised with care packages, and covered expenses when her scholarship didn't stretch far enough. And now, for her big welcome home, he didn't even make the list? He stared at the message again, waiting for a "just kidding" or a follow-up joke. Nothing came. His heart pounded, a sick mix of confusion and hurt swirling in his stomach. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement. He grabbed his phone and called his father, voice tight with disbelief. "Dad, I just got a text from Nathan. I'm not invited to Kayla's party." There was a beat of silence. Then his dad's voice came through casual, dismissive. "It's just a reunion, Evan. Don't blow it out of proportion. The venue's small. We couldn't invite everyone." Evan swallowed hard. "I saw Nathan's post, Dad. There are over 100 people tagged. You're telling me there's room for high school friends and co-workers, but not her own brother?" His dad let out a sigh, like Evan was the one making trouble. "You're taking this too personally." But how else was he supposed to take it? He'd spent years showing up for his siblings, for his parents, doing things no one ever asked him to. But they always expected it anyway. He was the dependable one, the fixer, the one who put his life on hold to help Kayla figure hers out. And now they had the audacity to treat him like some distant relative? He hung up before the conversation could go further. His hands trembled as he placed the phone on the table. The echo of "it's just a reunion" rang in his head like a slap. No, this wasn't just about a party. It was about finally realizing where he stood in their eyes. Not as a valued brother. Not as an irreplaceable piece of their lives. Just someone expendable. He stared at the family photo on the wall, the one taken at Kayla's graduation. She'd been smiling in her cap and gown. He remembered how proud he was, how much he felt like he'd played a part in getting her there. And now? He was cut out without a second thought. His chest burned, not with sadness, but clarity. He wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table that was never meant for him. If they wanted to act like he didn't exist, fine. He'd show them just how well he could exist without them. Without hesitating, he grabbed his laptop and opened a travel site. The words Aspen, Colorado jumped out at him like a lifeline. Snow-covered peaks, quiet lodges, a place to breathe, a place to disappear. If they wanted a party without him, they could have it. He was booking something better, a weekend that didn't need an invitation. A weekend that belonged to him. The next morning, Evan sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at his packed suitcase. The ski trip to Aspen was officially booked. Flight, lodge, equipment rental, the works. But the sting from last night still pulsed under his skin like a bruise that hadn't settled. He hadn't responded to his dad's last text. He didn't need to. The message had already been loud and clear. He didn't matter. He poured himself a coffee, the bitter aroma swirling through the kitchen, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. But before he could even take the first sip, his phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from his mom. "Your father told me you're upset. Don't be dramatic, honey. Just come anyway. It's not that serious." Evan stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Not that serious? Being erased from your own sister's homecoming wasn't serious? Being treated like an extra when you'd been the one holding everything together for years wasn't serious? He didn't respond. He couldn't. The words wouldn't have come out kind. Then, another ping. Nathan. Bro, you're really gonna ghost us over a party? Come on, don't be petty. Petty? That was the word Nathan chose after blindsiding him with a casual exclusion. Evan could almost hear the smugness in his brother's voice, the same tone he'd used every time he brushed off Evan's efforts, every time he failed to acknowledge how much Evan had done behind the scenes. He paced the living room, adrenaline rushing through his veins like gasoline on fire. Images flashed through his head, him staying up until 2 a.m., helping Kayla finish her visa application, him taking days off work to drive Nathan to rehab appointments after his accident, him covering gaps in rent when their parents struggled. But in return, he got this, a text, a shrug, and a suggestion that he get over it. Evan slammed his mug on the counter and grabbed his phone, thumb hovering over the call button. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to force them to see how cruel they'd been. But something stopped him. What was the point? They wouldn't understand. They never did. Instead, he opened Instagram and scheduled a post. A simple image of his boarding pass, flight details blurred out with a caption that read, "If you don't get a seat at the table, build your own damn cabin in the mountains." No names, no drama, just a quiet burn. His phone kept buzzing. Mom. Again. Then Kayla. But he didn't look. He had a flight to catch. And for the first time in years, he wasn't packing guilt in his suitcase. By evening, he was in a cab to the airport, the city lights blurring past the window like a chapter. He was finally ready to close. The driver made small talk, but Evan barely registered the words. He was already somewhere else. In that snow-covered cabin, fire crackling, silence wrapping around him like a blanket. As the plane lifted off the runway and climbed into the night, sky. Evan leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, heart still bruised but finally beating for himself. He didn't know what would happen back home. He didn't care. He wasn't their fallback plan anymore. He was done begging for a place in a family that only called when they needed something. They could keep their party. He had peace waiting in the mountains. The morning of his flight, Evan stood by the window, watching the city wake up through a fogged pane of glass. He didn't feel nervous, just hollow, like he was leaving behind more than just a house. His suitcase stood by the door, zipped tight, next to his boots and boarding pass. He wasn't running away. He was walking out with purpose. The ride, too. The airport was quiet. The driver asked him if he was heading out for business or pleasure. Evan simply said, "Neither, just clarity." The cabbie gave him a strange look, but Evan didn't explain further. There wasn't a way to explain the kind of peace he hoped to find in white slopes and mountain silence. As he boarded the plane, the tension in his chest began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it loosened, just enough for him to breathe deeper. He took his seat, pulled out his phone, and posted a photo of his view, the wing cutting through clouds, with a simple caption. "Turns out exclusion makes space for elevation." He put his phone on airplane mode before the notifications could start rolling in. By the time the plane touched down in Colorado, his inbox was already full. 3 texts from his mother, 2 missed calls from his dad, and a string of unread messages from Nathan. But Evan didn't read a single one. He was too busy breathing in the crisp mountain air, the scent of pine and snow curling around his senses like a reset button. A shuttle was waiting for him at the terminal, its logo reading, Silver Ridge Lodge, in bold lettering. The driver helped with his luggage and offered him a bottle of water. "First time up here?" the man asked with a friendly grin. "First time away?" Evan replied, staring out at the winding roads as they climbed higher through the forest. The lodge came into view like something out of a dream, a timber-framed cabin nestled against. Snow-covered peaks, smoke curling from the chimney, golden light glowing through frosted windows. Inside, the check-in clerk handed him a key card and a mug of mulled wine. "Cabin 5. You've got the best view of the mountain." Evan walked through the thick snow path, the sound of his boots crunching under each step like punctuation marks to a sentence he was finally finishing. The cabin was everything he imagined: warm, rustic, quiet. He dropped his bag and stepped out onto the private deck, the view stretching for miles, untouched snow sparkling under the fading light. Back inside, he lit the fireplace, let the heat fill the room, and curled into a chair with a blanket and his drink. The silence was strange at first. No voices, no chaos, no guilt humming in the background. Just the crackle of firewood and the slow exhale of his own breath. His phone buzzed once more. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he leaned back and whispered, to no one in particular. "Let them throw their party. I'm throwing myself a homecoming." And for the first time in years, it felt like he was finally where he belonged. Saturday morning arrived with a blinding sunrise pouring through the tall windows of Evan's cabin, casting golden light across the wood floors. He stood barefoot by the fireplace, sipping hot coffee, wrapped in a flannel robe, and listening to the wind dance across the snow-covered mountains outside. Somewhere back home, Nathan's party was probably just beginning, music thumping, drinks flowing, laughter echoing off the walls of a house Evan had helped pay for. He didn't care. Not anymore. Evan pulled out his phone just to check the weather forecast for the slopes, but paused when he saw the barrage of notifications. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. There it was. 3 missed calls from his mother, 2 voicemails from his dad, and a new message from Nathan. The subject line alone made his jaw clench. "Hope you're not still mad." He tapped it open out of sheer curiosity. "Hey man, just wanted to check in. Sorry if things got weird. You know how these events go. I didn't mean to hurt you, it's just logistics. Anyway, hope you're doing okay." Evan stared at the screen in disbelief. Logistics. That's what he was reduced to. An omitted variable in a spreadsheet. He didn't reply. Instead, he tossed the phone on the table and zipped up his ski jacket. The snow was fresh. He had better things to do than decode half-hearted apologies. Outside, the air was sharp, biting cold but exhilarating. His ski instructor, a gruff man, named Tom with a wind-burned face and a wide grin, was already waiting near the lift. "Ready to hit the blues today?" he asked, nodding toward the steeper trails ahead. "Absolutely," Evan said, his voice firm. "Let's go." They carved through the powder, wind rushing past Evan's ears, adrenaline replacing every ounce of resentment he still carried. Every turn down the slope felt like a clean break from years of family tension. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evan wasn't a supporting character in someone else's narrative. He was front and center, writing his own story in the snow. At the lodge later, he ordered a whiskey neat, took a seat by the panoramic window, and looked out at the mountains glowing under the late afternoon sun. His phone vibrated again. He ignored it. But then the bartender walked over, a puzzled look on his face. Someone called the front desk asking if you were okay. Sounded urgent. Evan's heart sank. He grabbed his phone and unlocked it. The screen lit up with another message. This time from his mother. "Evan, please call us. Something happened at the party. It's serious." He didn't move. His heart thudded against his ribs, but his mind held back. Serious? What now? Another message popped up, this time from his cousin Tessa. "You're not going to believe this. Call me ASAP." Evan exhaled slowly, setting the glass down with a sharp clink against the marble counter. The silence around him suddenly felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. He didn't want to call, didn't want to get pulled back into whatever disaster had unfolded back home. But something in his gut told him this wasn't just another family guilt trip. He grabbed his coat, stepped outside into the icy air, and dialed Tessa's number. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice low and breathless. "Evan," she said, "it's a mess. You dodged a bullet." His eyes narrowed. "What happened?" Long story short, Nathan got into a fight with Mia in front of everyone. Turns out he was texting his ex behind her back. She found out during the party. There was shouting, glass breaking, and Nathan punched a wall, broke his hand. The whole thing went up in flames. Evan stood frozen, the snow crunching beneath his boots as he listened. "Are you serious?" "It was chaos," she said. "Your dad tried to calm things down, but it only made it worse. People left early. Your mom was in tears. It was a full-blown disaster." Evan let out a stunned laugh, not out of spite, but because the irony was too loud to ignore. The party he'd been deemed unimportant enough to be excluded from had fallen apart without him, and now they were reaching for the one person they'd thought they didn't need. "Guess they finally realized who keeps things from falling apart," he muttered, half to himself. "Honestly," Tessa said, "I think they're starting to." Evan ended the call and looked out at the snowy horizon, the sun dipping behind the peaks like a curtain falling on the first act of a play. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and smiled. Let them pick up their own broken pieces. He wasn't going back. Not yet. Not ever, if they still didn't learn. And with that thought, he turned, walked back toward the warmth of the cabin, and left the noise of his old life buried beneath the snow. The next morning, Evan woke to the familiar hum of his phone, vibrating against the nightstand. He rolled over, reluctant to let the peace of the mountain morning slip away. The snow outside glowed under the early sun, and the cabin felt cocooned from the chaos he'd deliberately left behind. But curiosity gnawed at him. He reached for the phone and stared at the screen. 7 missed calls, 4 from his mother, 2 from his father, and 1 from Nathan. A single text followed. "Call me, please." He didn't respond. Instead, he tossed the phone aside and stepped out onto the balcony, coffee in hand. The cold air bit at his face, but it was the kind of cold that cleared your mind. Below, the slope shimmered, untouched and silent. He sipped slowly, feeling that fragile balance between anger and liberation steady itself inside him. Then came another text. This one from Mia. "Evan, I don't know what to do. He's a wreck. Please just talk to him." The audacity made him laugh bitterly into his cup. Mia, who'd never once questioned why he wasn't at the party, who stood by when his name was conveniently excluded, now she was reaching out like he was the emergency contact for Nathan's downfall. His phone buzzed again. This time, his dad. A voicemail. Evan played it, expecting another thinly veiled guilt trip. "Evan, your brother's in bad shape. He's blaming himself, but he's also blaming you. Says if you were here, none of this would have happened. He's got a busted hand and your mom's beside herself. Can you at least call?" Evan gritted his teeth. So now it was his fault Nathan blew up his own celebration? Now he was the missing ingredient that could have saved their perfect illusion. He closed his eyes, feeling the old weight they were so eager to place back on his shoulders. Another voicemail dropped, this time from Nathan himself. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for things to go down like this. I messed up, I get that, but can you come back? Can we talk?" Evan sat down, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic mug, heart pounding not with rage, but with the hollow ache of disappointment. The same cycle all over again. Ignore him, exclude him, then drag him back when the house catches fire. He wasn't going to be their extinguisher anymore. He scrolled through more messages, his mom pleading, his dad justifying, Mia apologizing. Even random relatives chiming in now, Aunt Linda telling him to do the right thing, Cousin David, reminding him that family is everything. The same people who stayed silent when he was erased. His phone chimed again. A photo popped up from Tara, his cousin and only real ally in the whole mess. It was a snapshot from the party aftermath. Nathan on the couch, hand wrapped in a bulky bandage, scowling. his mother pacing in the background, looking devastated. His dad sitting with a drink in hand, clearly worn out. The caption read, "Disaster. You really didn't miss anything." Evan chuckled, but it came out bitter. No, he hadn't missed anything. He'd dodged a storm disguised as a celebration. He opened his camera app, took a shot of the snow-covered mountain outside his window, the ski lift just starting to hum to life in the distance, and posted it online. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is not show up where you're not valued. Within minutes, likes rolled in. Comments followed. Friends, colleagues, even old acquaintances cheering him on. And for once, Evan felt a rush of something clean, something true. Validation not from his family, but from choosing his own peace. Over their dysfunction, the messages kept coming, but he didn't open them. Instead, he layered up, grabbed his ski gear, and headed for the lift. He didn't need their chaos to feel important. He didn't need their guilt to remind him of his worth. All he needed now was the slope ahead of him, the cold wind on his face, and the quiet realization that he had finally stopped waiting for their approval. Let them chase their own mess. He was done picking up the pieces. Evan woke to the sound of fresh snow tapping softly against the window pane. It was his 6th day in Breckenridge, and the peace had started to settle in his bones like warmth from the fireplace. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the cold morning air kiss his skin. But as he brought the mug to his lips, a familiar buzz erupted from his phone, slicing through the quiet. He picked it up, hesitating for a beat before unlocking the screen. The name flashing across it stopped him cold. Tara. He answered. "What now?" Her voice was low, almost amused. "Brace yourself. I have an update, and it's too good not to share." Evan leaned on the railing, waiting. Grandma showed up, his brow lifted. "What do you mean, showed up?" "At the party. Last minute. No one expected her, and she was pissed." Evan exhaled a short laugh. "What happened?" Tara wasted no time. "She walked right in, fur coat, cane and all, looked around, saw that you weren't there, and unleashed hell. Called your parents out in front of everyone. Told your dad he raised a selfish, spotlight-hogging brat and said Ryan's party was cursed the moment you were cut out of it." Evan blinked, stunned into silence. She said, and I quote, "This family forgot who's been holding it. Together all these years, and now you're watching it fall apart. That's not karma. That's consequence." He felt something shift inside his chest. Not vindication, not pride, something deeper, something raw. Validation, maybe. For once, someone from the inside had seen the truth, said it out loud, and not just someone. Grandma. She told Ryan to wipe that smug look off his face, reminded him who drove him to his first day of basic training, who stayed up with him, after every panic attack when he came home on leave. She listed every single thing you've ever done for him, Evan. Out loud. In front of everyone. Evan swallowed hard, staring into the snowy distance, the cold wind burning his eyes. "And your mom?" She tried to diffuse it. Said Grandma didn't understand. But Grandma just looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, you don't understand. You raised a son who only shows gratitude when it benefits him. And you pushed away the one child who actually gave a damn." He didn't speak. Just let the words sink into his chest like warmth seeping into frostbitten skin. "There's more," Tara continued. Apparently, she turned to the crowd, raised her glass, and said, "Here's to Evan for having the spine to walk away before this family dragged him down with them." Then she walked out. A laugh broke out of Evan's throat, sharp and stunned. "She really said that?" Word for word. I've never seen a room go so quiet. Evan sat down slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, guilt-tripped. It had never occurred to him that someone would finally speak up for him without him having to beg for it. Tara's voice softened. She sees you, Evan. Maybe she's the only one who ever really did. He didn't answer right away. He stared out at the snow-covered trees, heart pounding with something that wasn't anger for once, just relief. Tara added, "Thought you'd want to know. Thought maybe it'd help you feel a little less alone in all this." "It does," Evan whispered. After they hung up, he stayed on the balcony a while longer, the mug cooling in his hands, the mountain quiet swallowing every lingering echo of doubt. For years, he thought walking away would mean losing everything: family, connection, identity. But now he understood it differently. Sometimes walking away was how you saved yourself. Sometimes it took the loudest silence to make people finally hear. And sometimes it took the one voice no one expected, like a grandmother's, to remind everyone of what they'd tried so hard to forget. Evan stood on the edge of the slope, the morning sun glinting off the snow as he adjusted his ski goggles. It was his 7th day at the lodge, and he'd started to forget what it felt like to be anyone's second choice. His legs ached from the early morning run, but it was a good kind of ache, the kind that came from pushing himself for no one else but him. He was just about to head back to the cabin when his phone buzzed again, pulling him out of the moment. He hesitated, debating whether to ignore it like he had the last few dozen times. But something told him to check. Another message from Tara. "Mom's planning some kind of family talk when you're back. Says you're spiraling. Thought you'd want to know." Evan stared at the screen for a long moment, a bitter laugh slipping through his lips. Spiraling? That was rich. He was thriving, finally breathing on his own without a leash around his neck. He walked back to the cabin, snow crunching under his boots, the weight of the message settling in his chest. Back inside, he poured himself a drink, something stronger than coffee this time. The fireplace flickered across the room as he sat down and reread the message. Spiraling? If this, freedom, peace, silence, was spiraling, then maybe he should have lost control years ago. His phone buzzed again, another one from his father. "You've made your point, Evan. Time to come home and talk like a man." He stared at it, something hot rising in his chest. Talk like a man? The same man they hadn't thought twice about excluding, who only mattered when they needed damage control. And then, as if the universe wanted to test his patience, another text popped up, this time from Ryan. "Look, I screwed up. I get it now. But I'm still your brother. Can't we just move past this?" Evan shook his head slowly, jaw tightening. The same brother who'd let him be humiliated. The same one who shrugged him off with a text when he didn't make the guest list. Now, when everything had fallen apart, suddenly Evan mattered again. But it wasn't guilt he felt. Not even anger anymore. Just a cold, clean clarity. He grabbed his notebook, the one he'd brought for sketching views, not settling family scores, and wrote one sentence across the page in bold, thick strokes. "I will not be the cleanup crew anymore." They had pushed him out like an extra, made him feel disposable. But now, they wanted his presence to patch their mess, to fix the fractures they created. Not this time. Evan got up, walked out to the balcony, and stared at the mountains stretching endlessly before him. He pulled out his phone, snapped a photo of the snow-capped peaks, and posted it with a new caption. "When they call you broken for choosing peace, you know you've finally healed." The likes started rolling in, but Evan didn't watch the numbers. He just took a slow sip from his glass and leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled inside, the mountains stood tall in front of him, and for the first time in his life, Evan knew. He didn't owe them his presence, his silence, or his forgiveness. Not anymore. Evan's story is not just about a missed party. It's about years of unspoken expectations, unreciprocated efforts, and finally, a breaking point. What began as a simple text exclusion unearthed a deeper truth. Evan had been taken for granted, valued only for his utility, not his presence. He wasn't just left off a guest list. He was erased from the narrative of a family he had quietly held together for years. But instead of chasing validation or demanding apologies, Evan chose a different path, one of self-worth and freedom. His ski trip wasn't just an escape. It was a declaration that his peace mattered more than their approval. As the family unraveled in his absence, Evan didn't return to clean up their mess. He stayed in the stillness he had earned, choosing joy over guilt, presence over performance. The lesson here is powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is walking away from those who only value you when you're useful. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And healing doesn't always come with closure from others, it comes from finding peace within yourself. In a world where being the bigger person often means self-neglect, Evan's story reminds us, choosing yourself is never a betrayal, it's liberation.